Hey, Alex Sanfilippo here. Hey, I'm going to just do this video on the fly. This is my first attempt at it. I have no notes. I am just going to riff about what I see happening from the podcast guesting side of the mic. So if you're a podcast guest, aspiring podcast guest, what I see happening on that side of the mic and where I kind of see it going. So forgive me if this video is a little bit long. I don't mean for it to be, but I really want to explain why things are changing on that side of the mic. And to give you a quick, brief history, when I first started podcasting, it was many years ago. I think I first started looking for guests in 2015, maybe. I couldn't convince people to be guests. I mean, people would literally be like, "You're gonna have to pay me. Like, there's no way I'm gonna be a guest on a podcast." It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, right? Like people that were famous, people that weren't famous, and I was pretty good actually. Like I wasn't a bad. I was actually. I'll say I'm a good interviewer. Like I've definitely devoted time to the craft. So it wasn't like I wasn't good. My podcast at that point had thousands of people listening to each episode, so it wasn't even a small podcast. Like it was in a niche and really focused, narrowed in. Like anyway, it's doing a good job. Couldn't convince people. They did not see the opportunity there. Even when I launched Creating a Brand, which is a show that really peaked at, out of all podcasts, it ended up at like 197 out of every single podcast globally. So like it did really well. Same thing. People were like, I'm not going to waste my time being a guest on your podcast. Like this is 2018 we're talking about, right? And then you fast forward a few years and now people are like, I have to be a guest on your podcast. I don't even know what it's about, but I have to be on your podcast, right? And so what's happened is hosts used to be like, dear God, please let someone be a guest on my podcast, right? And then that's where something like Podmatch came in and really started helping, right? And it still helps, but just in a different way. Now it helps because it keeps focused on the right podcast and saves podcast hosts a lot of times. Because here's the thing, I don't know how many my team could tell me, but I'll be conservative here. 30 to 50 people ask to be a guest on my show every single week. And most of them, I'd say 99% of them never listen to it, don't even know the name. It's automated, right? All that whole mess. But here's the thing that I'm saying happen, right? So it's kind of the history of it. Where it is today is now we've seen the opportunity. So I'm a guest on podcasts, but only relevant ones. And I'll get into that in a moment. But we've seen the authority that brings, the power of it, why it's good. You don't have to even try to convince people that anymore. If you do, they're living in a different time. Let's put it that way. But when it comes to being a guest, like again, we're seeing that value. But here's the problem. At any given time, there is only 400,000 active podcasts. All right. It's not really that many when you think about the 2.8 million right now that are total, right? But only 400,000 active. And every year, over 300,000 of those are stopping and 300,000 new ones are taking their place. So it's always around that 400,000. But here's the crazy thing. I decided to look at independent podcasts with more than one episode that does interviews and that is not run by a celebrity or a big production house like Disney, Paramount, any of those type of things, right? That's not those. And how many of them are actually making it? Like they're set up for success. And there's plenty of data to be able to show this. There's about 34,000 right now. So here's the thing. There are people wanting to be guests on podcasts more than ever. I'll get that number in a minute. There's about 34,000 of those podcasts. That's it. It's not really that many when you think about it, right? Now, on the flip side, how many people are trying to be a guest right now, do you think? There's a lot of data around this as well. And I don't know how this is calculated. This is not my source, so you have to go look this up yourself. And there's plenty of places you can do this. Edison Research is like one of the big ones, I'd say, that is credible. But for people that are actively looking to be on podcasts, meaning they're on more than 2 episodes in recent times, whatever that might mean, again, it's not my data, but this is a valid estimate. There's about 12 million people actively looking to be guests on podcast. 34,000 people looking for guests today. 12 million or more, right? That's just the ones that we can prove are looking because they've been on a couple podcasts recently, right? Which means I'm guessing it's probably closer to 20 million people looking actively to be guests on podcasts right now. That is a problem. Let's put it that way, right? Then I'm not going to get into the whole ethics of it and stuff like that because I can see a very bad direction podcasting could potentially be going in. I personally won't allow that to happen. And we've got enough at this point. I'm very thankful our company, along with our strategic partners, have enough influence in the space that we can keep podcasting healthy instead of going in this bad direction. So we're going to keep this thing actually serving people, right? But hey, again, here's the problem. There are so many people looking to be guests on podcast. When you're pitching to be a guest, whatever your expertise is, whatever it is that you're good at, I guarantee you there's 10 people pitching that same week as you that are more qualified and probably a better guest than you. And I'm not trying to be rude or mean, right? That's just the reality of what we're running into. So you have to do something to be different. And that's where we come into how to be a guest on a podcast as I'm recording this and into the future forever. Because that 20 million people that I'm estimating that's trying to be a guest on podcasts, I bet in a year that's 40. But I don't think that the actual active podcast list is going to grow that much. As a matter of fact, I'm estimating there'll be 8,000 more active podcasts that are in that category that are, I'd say, worthwhile to be on. There'll be 8,000 more by June 15th, 2025. So again, we're looking at millions. Like the growth is exponentially faster. So we have to just think about that, right? Okay, so now I want to get into some tactics for being a guest on a podcast. I'm not going to get into how I pitch. I'll drop a link below where you can see how I actually do my pitch. But here's the first thing that's most important. If you're a guest, you have to do the outreach. The days of hosts reaching out to guests are nearing an end. It is up to you, the guest, to decide that, you know what, I want to be on this podcast. Because here's the thing. If you're not, like I said, there's 10 people more qualified than you that have the exact same expertise that are reaching out. Listen, if you get out of life what you put into it. So you've got to be willing to put something in. You have to have a pitch. So you have to be sending the request. You can't sit back and be like, where is it? I'm waiting for it. Here's a great example. I had somebody who's A-list, famous person, join Podmatch. Furious a month later because they said they had like 2 people reach out to them. I was like, listen, dude, I'm like, you're famous, sure. I mean, this is how I treat famous people, just like everybody else. I was like, listen, dude, you're famous, but someone more famous than you is on the platform. I was like, as a matter of fact, I can look up right now. I'm like, there's like 8 people more famous than you on this platform. I'm like, why the heck would they waste their time with you? And I was like, reach out and see what happens. Boom, like that. In 4 months, he was on 120 podcasts. And he's like, how? He's like, I don't understand that. I'm like, it's because they have options, right? Better options than you. You have to do the outreach. So again, you have to humble yourself when I'm talking about this. The prideful guest that's not willing to reach out and waits for people is the guest that doesn't get on podcasts in the future. You have to humble yourself and say, you know what? I'm probably not the best guest, but I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to reach out. So step 1, have a pitch and be willing to reach out first. Be willing to follow up as well. I'm not going to get into all that, but make sure your pitch is good. It has to be unique. Again, I'll link to exactly how I do this. I get on about 97% of the podcasts I pitch. You know, I shouldn't say that. Last year I was. This year I'm trending closer to 80%. And again, there's people more qualified than me that talk about the exact same stuff I talk about. So I'm like, obviously it's going to get harder and harder. The other thing I want to talk about real quick, because I think this is important, is how many podcasts should you be on? As many as makes sense. And what I mean by that is I don't think a podcast every day makes sense for anybody. I think those days are behind us. What I think matters is consistency. How many podcasts can you consistently be on for the next 3 years? Is it 1 a month? Is it 2 a month? Is it 3 a month? I hope it's not more than that because I don't see the point in that. If it's, I think 1 a month, by the way, is a huge opportunity because you can turn any podcast episode as a guest into 1 month of content easily. My team can turn it into, I could probably take one podcast. I think I turn into a year of content easily because I'm talking, right? You just capture the video yourself and you turn into stuff. I'll link to something below as a buddy who does that. He shoots for 1 a month. That's plenty. But what matters is the consistency in it. On both sides of the mic, we're saying it's the same. You have to remain consistent if you want to get traction in what you're doing. So again, hosts, I tell them, hey, listen, if you're not releasing episodes when you say you are on a consistent basis, you're not going to make it. Guests, same thing. You can't show up and be I was on 10 shows. Great, you're on 10 shows in the same month. Who the heck cares, right? Like, can you show me that you can do 1 a month for 10 months straight or longer than that, right? I think it'll take 3 years. 1 a month is probably a good cadence, but understand the power of being a guest on a podcast. There is no other medium known to man, nor will there probably ever be, that are more powerful than podcast. It is the number one thing. So keep that in mind. Now, I know what a lot of people are thinking. They're checking us out. They're like, cool, okay, I can do 1 a month. It's got to be the biggest podcast in the world. I'm telling you now, I've been on 5 million plus download podcasts per 7 days or month. I don't know what it is, but some of the biggest podcasts in the world. I have gotten almost no traction on those. Now, the first thing you might be thinking is like, well, probably didn't do a good job, right? I re-listened to the second biggest one of those, or the third biggest one of those I was on. And I say this with all humility I can. I told my wife this. I'm like, that was the pinnacle of me doing well. The guy told me there was not a single word to edit out. I had no filler words. I made 0 mistakes. Everything was perfect. Like literally, if you want to hear the perfect podcast episode, I could send you that, but I'm not going to do that because I'm trying to be humble here. But literally, I'd never done a better job. I got almost nothing from that. Perfect audience, perfect everything, perfect delivery, nothing wrong with it. I expected to bring you millions of dollars. I'll be honest. Like I really did. But here's the problem. And this is what we don't notice with these big podcasts. Nobody who listens to that podcast cares about you at all. And I don't mean to be rude or mean, but the reason these podcasts are big is because that host has an incredible fan base that is obsessed with them. you're the little cherry on top that they're probably like, I don't really like that. Toss it, right? They're going to listen because they just want to hear what that host is going to say. And sure, they might learn from you, but they're like, whoo, the host did so good at interviewing whatever that person's name was. I learned so much from it. That host is the best. They literally do not care. All right. So you got to keep that in mind. The big shows, you're going to find a waste of time. And now at this point, I've turned down most of the big shows that have asked me to be on them because I get asked to be, like I said, on a lot of shows. I'm extremely grateful for that. Do not waste your time chasing the big shows because you'll never get on them. I was recently on a show that he told me that 100 people have listened to the show or something like that. I got more business from that show than one that gets 2.7 million downloads per 7 days. Like that seems stupid, right? You're like, how is that possible? That's the podcast I did perfect on, by the way, right? But the smaller one had my audience. The people were listening to gain information. They were listening to learn. They weren't listening to a celebrity. They're listening to somebody that's like, oh, this person's similar to me. Who they bring on as a guest? Could I meet that person somehow? Could that person also help me? They're still curious. So the smaller podcasts are going to do so much better for you. Do not go waste your time chasing these giant podcasts. Literally, I meet people every day that like are quote unquote smart people that don't understand this logic. And I'm like, go for it. Like, you're not very smart though. Like the fact that most people, not everyone understands that blows my mind. And if you didn't know that, but now you do, take credit. This was your idea. I didn't teach you this. You know this. You're smarter than most of the big celebrity people in the world that think they need to get on big shows. Remember, the audience of big shows do not care about you. You're the cherry that they're going to throw out because they love the host. The smaller shows are people that are seeking information. They want to learn and grow, and they're willing to expand their network to make that happen. And you're the extension of that network. Focus on the smaller shows. The last thing I'll mention here is not all shows are created equal. If you are talking about, I live in Jacksonville, Florida, so I'll use surfing as an example. If you're talking about, like you're a pro surfer, you're talking about surfing, do not go on a golf podcast. Do not go on a business podcast. Do not go on a comedy podcast. Don't waste your time going on these podcasts. They're not perfectly aligned with what you do. That's why I say one is enough. For me, I aim for 12 podcasts a year. But guess what? The podcasts I go on are about podcasting. I don't want to go on your entrepreneurship podcast. Yes, I'm an entrepreneur, but that's not what I'm talking about. Yes, I'm a software developer. I created Podmatch, right? So software as a service, SaaS founder. But I don't go on SaaS podcasts. I go on podcasts about podcasting because that is what I talk about. And so don't waste your time spreading a thin, like a net, being like, oh, I got to go on all these shows. And look, I was on 100 shows this year. Big deal. Nobody cares, right? Like nobody cares because most of those shows, no one who's actually curious or interested in what you do is going to be listening because they're like, oh, cool, this person is a surfer. Like this is a golf podcast. I could care less. There's no beach around me, right? You got to really hone in your focus. Less is more and get really good at delivering your message, finding your lane, getting focused. I'm telling you, this is the future of podcast guesting. Some of this is probably really hard to hear. And I'm sorry if I'm coming across harsh. I promise I'm a nice person, I like to think. So I get along with everybody. And if you want to challenge into this, I'm down to learn myself and grow. But I'm telling you, I've got all the data. I mean, I've got over 70 or 80,000 interviews data now. I can tell you exactly what's right and wrong. So I'm just trying to share as humbly as I can, but I really am here to help and to serve. So again, remember, you're not the only person trying to get on a podcast. You've got to outreach. Your pitch has got to be good. You got to do it consistently for years to come. You also have to make sure that you are in your lane and not spreading yourself thin and going into all these different topics. Stay where you're supposed to go and focus on the small shows because that's where you're really going to be able to generate some business and some true leads to the message that you're serving the world with. Like I said, it's my first attempt at this. I was thinking this would be like 8 minutes. I might get 14. I am so sorry, everybody. But I hope this was really helpful for you. If you have any questions, drop it below. I'll drop some links in there that I think might be helpful along with this. And thank you so much for being a podcast guest, because here's why I love guesting. At the end of the day, podcasts are driving the way with just helping people in the world achieve the result that they're looking for. And I think that being a guest on a podcast is a great way to get that message out and change the world one listener at a time. So keep on doing that. Keep on adding value. Keep on seeking to serve. And I'm here to help however I can. So thank you so much for checking this out. I appreciate you.